Շարունակում ենք մեր հաղորդումը։ Վերջերս հայ բարեգործական ընդհանուր միության գրասենյակում մեր ժողովուրդը առիթ ունեցավ հանդիպելու հայտնի գրող Քրիս Բոհջալյանի հետ նրա նոր գրքի շնորհանդեսի առիթով։ Այժմ ուզում եմ սիրով ձեզ ներկայացնել մեր պատրաստած ակնարկայիդ մասին, ինչպես նաև մեր արած հարցազրույցը հեղինակի հետ։
AGBU headquarters in Manhattan, critically acclaimed and New York Times bestselling author Chris Bohjalian met with members of Armenian community as part of his US book tour for his newly published novel, The Guest Room. The Guest Room is a powerful novel telling a spellbinding story of a party gone horribly wrong. Two men lie dead in a suburban living room, two women are on a run from police, and a marriage is ripping apart at the seams. During his presentation, the author spoke about the origins of the book, discussed the social issues touched in the novel, and talked about his own creative writing process. As part of his presentation, he also read several excerpts from the novel. Chris Bohjalian is the author of 18 books, including Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, The Sandcastle Girls, Skeletons at the Feast, The Double Bind, Midwives, and others. His novel Midwives was a #1 New York Times bestseller and a selection of Oprah's book club. At the end of the presentation, an engaging Q&A with the audience took place, during which Chris Bohjalian gave several guests a t-shirt with Books logo printed on them. AGBU continues with its ongoing effort to promote and support Armenian artists working in many disciplines, and is committed to providing a platform for our creative professionals to reach a larger audience. At the conclusion of the event, all guests had an opportunity to speak with Chris Bohjalian and had the copy of their book signed by the author. We sat down with Chris Bohjalian for interview to speak about his newly released novel, The Guest Room. Chris, thank you so much for coming on our show. Congratulations on your 18th novel, Guest Room. Before I ask you to talk a little bit about plot, of course, without giving out spoilers, something very interesting attracted my attention. In your dedication, there's this very interesting line, and it reads, "For the girl in a lobby who was paying the bellman at 3 a.m.
Yes.
What does this mean?
This book had its origins in Yerevan in 2013. My wife and my daughter and I were visiting the country again, and on this particular trip we had brought with us a friend of my daughter's. The two girls were 19. This friend had never been to Armenia, and that's why she was with us. She was going home the day before my wife and my daughter and me. She was on that 6 a.m. flight to Moscow that many of us know. And so I said, meet me downstairs in the lobby at 3:30 in the morning so that I can bring you to the airport, get you checked in, get you as far as security. Because I'm a dad, I got downstairs at about 10 after 3 in the morning because I didn't want her alone in a hotel lobby in the middle of the night. And while I was waiting for her, I saw another young woman, a girl younger than my daughter and her friend. She was maybe 17, 18 years old. And she was clearly in escort. She was paying off the bellman to go upstairs and go back to work. We've all seen escorts in the lobbies of nice hotels in London or San Francisco or New York. But this was heartbreaking for me as a dad of a daughter, and it was heartbreaking for me as an Armenian. And I began to wonder, what is her story? What is the story of girls like her? And that's why when I finished the book, I dedicated the book in part to her.
And then I flipped the page and we have a little prologue here, and it's by Boris Pasternak. And he reads, "I don't think I'd love you so deeply if you had nothing to complain of and nothing to regret." What does this mean?
I love Dr. Zhivago. And I love that quote because it is two of my favorite words and two of the words that figure prominently in The Guest Room: love and regret. So much of this book is about regret, specifically the regrets of a man named Richard, and so much of it is about his love for his family, but it is also about the love that different people in his family share at different times in the book and in different ways, and of course, Anahit. and the way that Richard Chapman's interest in Anahit, I hope in the novel, transforms in an unexpected way.
What's the general plot of the book?
The Guest Room is a literary thriller. It's a novel of suspense about a marriage in crisis, two remarkable women, one of whom is Armenian, and that one moment you wish more than anything you could take back. The players, well, there's Richard and Kristen Chapman. She's a history teacher. He's an investment banker. They have what I hope is an adorable 9-year-old daughter named Melissa. Richard and Kristen agree to host Richard's idiot younger brother's bachelor party at their house. They fully expect that Richard's brother's friends will bring a stripper. Instead, they bring what they believe are two escorts who turn out to be human traffic. Two Armenian girls, sex slaves, abducted when they are teenagers, enslaved for 5 years in Moscow before being brought to the United States. And the two girls, for a variety of reasons that will be revealed, choose that bachelor party to kill their Russian gangster captors and escape into Times Square. That's chapter 1. So if you're Richard, how do you explain to your wife, honey, don't come home tonight. There are two dead Russians in the living room. The house is a crime scene. And oh, by the way, I was upstairs in the guest room with one of the girls. How do you explain that to your 9-year-old daughter? And over the next 270, 280 pages, the book chronicles Richard's descent from a very, very powerful, successful investment banker to something very different. And it also follows Anahit, who is renamed by her Russian captors, Alexandra, as she tries to stay ahead of the police and the Russian gangsters who she knows will kill her in a heartbeat.
Of course, I want to talk about the issue of human trafficking, particularly in this novel. It's an Armenian girl. We're talking about post-Soviet Armenia, where, as you were saying earlier in your speech, when the economy collapsed, the Eastern European countries, ex-Soviet countries, this whole illegal business has just blossomed. But listening to you just now, an interesting point crossed my mind. Richard's family is a quite essential American family, right? Story number one. And then you have this completely different story of this Armenian girl being abducted and being a victim of being a sex trafficker. How did these two stories comport? What is the connection between the two?
It's a great question. And there are two connections that come to mind in the origins of the guest room. First of all, I think in some ways the guest room is a bookend to the Sandcastle Girls. 1915, 2016. Anahit, in a number of different scenes, either in Yerevan or in New York City, is talking about her ancestors and the way when our women in 1915 weren't murdered, they were sexually attacked. The way that they were sold, the way that they were Islamized. And Anahit wonders on occasion about their honor, the honor of the women in 1915 and 1916 who chose death over desecration. The other connection that you bring up that's really interesting to me is why is this set in America? Yeah. And the reason why it is set in America is this. My principal audience are North Americans. Women in Indianapolis or Jacksonville or Denver or St. Paul. Those are who read my books. And so when I'm writing, I'm not precisely thinking of my readers and writing for them. But I know that for my books to succeed, there often needs to be a North American connection. I know that most Armenian girls, when they're trafficked, they wind up in Dubai or Moscow or Istanbul, a tragic irony of ironies. But I brought Alexandra, that's what the Russians name her. She's born Anahit, and the Russians rename her Alexandra. I brought her to the United States because I was writing for North Americans.
You know, when we speak about Armenia, human trafficking is not something that comes to mind at first. In the course of your research that you did for this novel, what have you discovered? What have you learned? How major the problem is in Armenia today?
Yep. How big is the problem of human trafficking in Armenia? It's not nearly as bad as it is in some of the other post-Soviet republics or some of their satellite nations. There's a definite economic connection. The more dire the economy, the more likely it is that women and young girls will be forced into prostitution and sexual slavery. We know how dire the economy is in parts of Armenia right now, especially when you are not in Yerevan. And it is often those girls who are most in jeopardy. And as much as it pains me to recall some of the conversations that I've had in my interviews, I've met and heard stories of Armenian girls trafficked not simply by people who pretend to be friends of the family, but in one case by an uncle, and another case by the girl's own mother. And that only happens in desperate economic times.
And I should add that, and you mentioned this in your presentation, that in Armenia, the issue of domestic abuse is widespread. And it's something that I'm sure that both government and citizens have to be more educated about to make a change. There's another very interesting section of the book that I want to quickly address. Her parents and grandparents. There's a very powerful chapter when you described in vivid details the moment the earthquake in Gyumri struck and killed her grandparents, and emotionally and intellectually killed her father, in essence. Why Gyumri? Why earthquake? Why to put this in this book?
Yeah. Why does Gyumri appear in the guest room? When I was trying to understand who the Armenian girl was, I was thinking about what we call her backstory. Who, for example, are Anahit's mother and father? And when I was thinking about her age, I realized that her parents might have been newlyweds in Gyumri. And that is a story that has never been told in America. That's a story
despite the size of the tragedy.
Right, yes, despite the, yes. In 1988, we were all aware of it, but then, of course, the news cycles moved on. So many other things have happened. And whenever I've talked to survivors of Gyumri, their stories are heroic. They're wrenching, and they're inspiring. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to begin this book with the Gyumri earthquake? So the first chapter I wrote is actually a chapter that now appears on page 285 of the book. But this novel began with the ground shaking and the buildings collapsing in Gyumri.
It's wonderful to hear you elaborate on that section, because it's so powerfully written. Comes personally from me because I was born in Gyumri. My relatives still live in Gyumri. And that section, when her father is sitting in a lada and sees the building collapse, gave me goosebumps. And just to talk a little bit more about symbolism in a book, which is just wonderfully expressed. When they open the boxes and inside are dolls, and when she's in the house in Westchester, she sees dolls. And there is such a nuanced human connection between the seemingly different human stories that we are following.
Yeah. There is a big difference, but they're linked by the Barbies, and by they I mean two girls. The Barbie dolls are perhaps among the most important symbols in the book because they link Anahit and Melissa. Melissa is the 9-year-old girl growing up just outside of New York City an immensely privileged existence. Her father's an investment banker, her mom's a school teacher, they've got a beautiful house. And by design, I created parallels between what Anahit endured and what Melissa is experiencing. Because Anahit, until she's abducted by this Russian connection, this Russian crime lord, has a lovely childhood. You know, she's got a wonderful mother, she's got a wonderful grandmother, she's going to be a ballerina, you know, she loves the opera house, she wants to be the next Velvet Bird, and then it's all taken away from her after her mother dies, when she is living only with her grandmother, and it is easy for the Russians to prey on her. And so the Barbies that Anahit has as a little girl are in some ways the link to the Barbies that Melissa is playing with now in the present. And of course, certainly in America, the Barbie doll is a symbol for a lot of things. People love or hate the Barbie doll. They either love it because they think it's beautiful and girls will play with Barbie dolls for hours, or they hate it because it is an objectification of women that is physically impossible. And so when I was creating Anahit, the sex slave, I thought also of the objectification of women and the degradation of women.
I want to pick up on that point of degradation of women, because here in the beginning of the novel, we have an American family, a man who wants to do a favor to his brother, and in essence be a patron of this sex trade in some ways, right? They hire these women to perform, you know, sexually arousing acts to satisfy men. Is this maybe an indirect commentary on some of an American culture that we live in today?
Yeah, I think it's even more than indirect. I hope it's very direct commentary. I have no idea why this thing called a bachelor party exists in this day and age. It baffles me. It completely baffles me. And the thing about a bachelor party and strip clubs is that they create in men not simply this individual objectification of women, but this horrible herd behavior. The men at the bachelor party do things because they're in a group that I don't think they would ever do if they were alone with a woman. There's no place in the world, I think, more depressing than a strip club. And I don't think I'm a priggish man. But at a strip club, the girls don't especially like the men. They know the men are creeps. It's all bad. It's all bad. It's all bad.
Definitely. But of course, above all, this is a crime novel.
Yeah.
This is a page turner. And I think one of the incredible things that you always accomplish in your novels, you manage to take an incredibly serious, important issue and present it in a way that is entertaining, that is a good read, and just fun to sit down, open a book, and read a story. How difficult was it to write this?
In some ways, it was no more difficult to write than any of my books, because I think all of my books are heartbreakers in some way. I wrote an entire novel about the Armenian genocide. Another novel is about the Holocaust. My contemporary literature is often about what my daughter calls, and my daughter's so smart, seriously messed up young women. They're cutters, they're drug addicts, they're burners. So this book, in some ways, was of a piece with those others. What maybe made it a little more difficult in some ways is that I'm a dad of a daughter, and you never want to see anything like this befall any young woman.
Dear viewers, now we heard from the author in the first person guest room by our own Chris Bohjalian. Incredible read, entertaining read, eye-opening read, socially conscious read, available pretty much everywhere. So get a copy, read it, and enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. It's always great to see you.
Same
Thank
here.
you so much.
Same here.